Good morning, students. Today's demonstration it's about mandible. So here comes the mandible bone. So it is a unilateral bone which is present in the midline. Okay. So the mandible is connected to the cranium. So by means of a joint, it is called temporomandibular joint. Okay. So the mandibular fossa of the temporal bone, so the dot gets with the head of the mandible. So they were forming a joint. Okay. Of course, the mandible is commonly called the lower jaw, which is movable. Okay. And we come to the parts connected to the mandible. So we have the head of the mandible, and followed by the neck of the mandible. And next comes so in front of the head is otherwise called condylate process. So in front of the head, so there is one more process called, you can see this is the coronoid process of the mandible. So this is the coronoid process, and the head is otherwise called condylate process. Okay. So in between these two processes, there is a notch. This is called the mandibular notch. You can see the mandibular notch. So the mandibular notch is traversed by the mesenteric vessels and nerves. Mesenteric vessels and nerves from outside to inside. Okay. Coming to the neck of the mandible. So in front of the neck, so there is a small shallow depression. What is it called? Pterygoid fovea. So this depression is called pterygoid fovea. So that gives attachment to the lateral pterygoid muscle. Lateral pterygoid muscle. Okay. So we have the muscles of mastication from the temporalis. Okay. Followed by the lateral pterygoid, medial pterygoid, and then comes the masseter. So these are all the muscles together called the muscles of mastication. Of course, the buccinator also it is included in the muscles of mastication because it helps in the making of the food bolus. That is the muscles of mastication, and the lateral pterygoid, so that comes and attached to the pterygoid fovea. Pterygoid fovea in relation to the neck of the mandible. So it's the neck of the mandible. So that's of the head, neck, the coronoid process. The coronoid process that receives temporalis. Okay. So the temporalis is inserted to the coronoid process of the mandible. Okay. So the next part of the mandible, so which is a quadrangular shape. So this is called the ramus of the mandible. So you can see this is the ramus of the mandible. So here comes the ramus, which is quadrangular shape, which has got outer surface. So this is outer surface, and here comes the inner surface. This is the inner surface of the ramus. Okay, and it has got the posterior border, which is blunt, and you can see nicely. So here comes this is the anterior border of the ramus, which is sharp. The sharp anterior border, of course, that also receives the fibers of the temporalis. So the temporalis muscle, so that arises from the temporal fossa, it descends down. Okay, so between the gap between the zygomatic process and the sides of the skull, it reaches the infratemporal fossa, okay, inserted to the coronoid process, and also the anterior border of the ramus of the mandible. Okay, so it is the fan-like muscle. So the fibers that converge as it descends downwards and inserted to the coronoid process. So that's about the temporalis and its attachment to the coronoid fossa and the anterior border of the ramus of the mandible as well. Okay, so the outer surface of the ramus, it gives attachment to the masseter. So you can see this area, this colored area. So that gives attachment to the masseter. The masseter muscle is attached, okay, over the external surface of the ramus of the mandible. So the internal surface of the ramus of the mandible, you can see here, so close to the angle. So here comes the angle of the mandible. Okay, so between the ramus and the body, you can see this is the angle of the mandible. So close to the angle, the internal surface of the ramus of the mandible. So it gives attachment to the medial pterygoid. You can see here, so this colored area. So here comes exactly the rough area. That's because of attachment of the medial pterygoid muscle. So here comes the medial pterygoid. So here comes the masseter. You can see the masseter. So in relation to the ramus of the mandible. So this is the ramus. Hope it is clear for you. So this is the quadrangular shaped ramus. Okay. So of course the inferior part of the ramus, it continues with the base of the mandible. Okay. So coming to the inner surface, so apart from the attachment of the medial pterygoids, you can see very important foramina here. So this foramina is called the mandibular foramina. You can see this foramina. So this side it is clear. You can see the foramina here. So this is the foramina. What is this foramina called? So this is the mandibular foramen. So the mandibular foramina, it is traversed by, so we have the inferior alveolar nerve, which is branched from the posterior division of the mandibular nerve, and the inferior alveolar artery, so it is branched from the first part of the maxillary artery. Okay, so these two together, okay, that enters the mandibular foramen. Okay, so of course the mandibular foramen that leads to mandibular canal that lies within the body of the mandible. Okay, so inferior alveolar nerve, which is very important, otherwise called dental nerve. So the dental nerve or the inferior alveolar nerve is branched from the mandibular division of, okay, trigeminal nerve. Okay, it divides into anterior division, posterior division. The posterior division it gives inferior alveolar. Of course, it has got a lingual and auriculotemporal also, that we'll discuss in the infratemporal fossa in detail about the mandibular nerve and its branches. Okay, so the mandibular foramen, it is guarded by tongue-shaped elevation. You can see here. So this is called lingula, like tongue-shaped elevation. So this is called lingula. You can see here. There is the lingula, which is tongue-shaped. Okay, that guards the mandibular foramen. So the lingula is very important. Of course, it gives attachment to the spinomandibular ligament. Spinomandibular ligament also important structures that is developed from the Meckel's cartilage. So I hope you aware about the pharyngeal arches. The first arch cartilage, okay, is what is called Meckel's cartilage. Meckel's cartilage, the derivatives from the Meckel's cartilage. So we have the spinomandibular ligament. So the spinomandibular ligament is attached to the lingula. So that comes here. So it is very important. Spinomandibular, stylomandibular. So these two are the accessory ligaments of the temporomandibular joint. Okay, so spinomandibular is attached to the lingula. Okay, from the spine of the sphenoid to the lingula of the mandible. So that's about the spinomandibular ligament attachment to the lingula. So that's about the main features or the inner surface of the ramus of the mandible. Is it clear? So that's about the ramus of the mandible. So you can see the angle here. So this is called the angle of the mandible. So the lower border of the ramus, so that continues with the base of the mandible. So that's about the ramus. So coming to the mandible, so which has got a U-shaped body. So you can see here. So this is a U-shaped body. So this is called the body of the mandible. U-shape, which is U-shape. Okay, so this is U. Okay, U-shaped body. So body has got mainly. So we have outer surface and of course the inner surface. So the inner surface of the body, and here comes the outer surface of the body. It has got upper border. So there is upper border of the body of the mandible. And here comes the lower border of the body of the mandible. See, the lower border of the body of the mandible is otherwise called base of the mandible. Is it clear? So lower border of the body is otherwise called base. So it is otherwise called base of the mandible. So the base of the mandible, and here comes the upper border. So the alveolar border. So you can see the upper border mainly consists of the alveolar fossae. So that lodges the teeth. You can see the teeth here. So all the teeth that lies within the alveolar arch. So of course, it is otherwise called alveolar arch, representing the fossae. Okay, so which lodges the teeth. So that's about the alveolar arch, otherwise called the upper border of the body of the mandible. Okay, and the base of the mandible, otherwise called the lower border of the body of the mandible, otherwise called base. Okay, and so come to the features for the outer surface. So in the midline, so it presents mainly, you can see here this is called the mental protuberance. So there comes the attachment of the mentalis. You can see the mental protuberance here, and the other, of course, the depressor labio oris muscle also that comes here. Okay, and we have a very important foramina. Okay, so this is called the mental foramina. You can see the mental foramina. So here comes the mental foramina. So that's about the mental foramina. So the mental nerve that comes out of the mental foramina. So the mental foramen is very important to determine the age of the man. Okay, so the determination of the age, so whether it belongs to children or which age group, mainly it belongs to whether it belongs to children or adult or old age. So that is mainly the position of the mental foramina. So if the mental foramen is close to the upper border, then it belongs to the old age group. Okay, so if it is close to the lower border, then it belongs to the children. So if it is in between the upper border and lower border of the body, then it belongs to the adult. Okay, so that is the significance of the position of mental foramina. Okay, if it is close to the upper border. Okay, so because in case of old age, okay, there is a resorption of the alveolar fossae. So because of the eruption of the tooth, so that leads to the resorption of the the upper border, of course, the alveolar fossa, thereby the upper border that it reduces in height, thereby it comes close to the mental foramen. Okay, so that is the reasons the mental foramen is close to the upper border in case of old age people. So in the, of course, in the children it is close to the lower borders. In adults it is in between the upper border and the lower border. So that's about the significance of the mental foramina in determining the age of the mandible. Okay, so of course the sex of the mandibles, that is because of by seeing the you can see the angle. If the angle is everted outside, okay, so that is if it belongs to the male. If it is inverted, so then it belongs to the female. Okay, and also of course the weight of the mandibles, if it is heavy, so then it belongs to male. If it is lightweight, and it belongs to the female. Okay, and the very important, the angle is it is obtuse in children. Of course in old age also it is, the angle is obtuse. Okay, so in adults it is, of course, it is acute. Okay, so that's about the sex determination, and the obtuse and acute in case of the old age and the children. Okay, so that's about the angle of the mandible and body of the mandible, so which is U-shaped. So come to the inner surface of the body. You can see the inner surface of the body. So mainly in the midline, the inner surface, it shows the genial tubercles. Okay, so upper 2, lower 2. So total 4 genial tubercles. So we have here. So these are the genial tubercles. So the genial tubercles that gives attachment to the geniohyoid. Okay, geniohyoid muscle and the genioglossus. Okay, so that's about the genial tubercles. And also, so close to this area, so we have the anterior belly of digastric attachment also. So that comes here. So these are the genial tubercles that you can see nicely. Apart from that, there is important line. You can see this is called the mylohyoid line. So very nicely seen, the mylohyoid line. So the mylohyoid line that gives attachment to the mylohyoid muscle, which is considered as the oral diaphragm. So this same, the mylohyoid line that divides the two fossae mainly. So we have above the mylohyoid line, so we have the sublingual fossa, and below the mylohyoid line, so here comes the submandibular fossa. What is this fossa? Submandibular fossa and sublingual fossa divided by the mylohyoid line. Okay, so these are all the features or the inner surface of the body of the mandible, and mainly in the midline, so we have the genial tubercles. Okay, upper and lower, upper 2, lower 2 genial tubercles. Okay, so that's all about the mandible. So hope it is clear for you. So the main important features, we have the head, neck, okay, and the conoid process, so the ramus and U-shaped body. The body is U-shaped. Okay, the lower part of the body is otherwise called base. Okay, so that's about the mandible. And go through the textbook, read the muscle attachments, and it's very important. One more ligament here, so that comes here. Angle of the mandibles, we have the stylomandibular ligament. Okay, stylomandibular ligament that is attached to the angle of the mandible. Stylomandibular ligament is condensation of deep cervical fascia. So as we already discussed about the ligament close to the mandibular foramina attached to the lingula, so that is derived from the Meckel's cartilage. That's very important. The differentiation between the stylomandibular and spinomandibular. Spinomandibular is developed from the Meckel's cartilage. The stylomandibular is a condensation of the deep cervical fascia. Which is the deep cervical fascia from styloid process to the angle of the mandible. So that's about the mandible. So go through the textbook, see the diagrams, try to understand the muscular attachments and the important features of the different parts of the mandible. So thank you for your patience listening.